Filipino Grievances Agents Gov. Jean Leonard Wood by Junaria Gorin Locon, Jimalin Tagtagan, Virgilio Castro. The White Man's Burden. The White Man's Burden by Rudyard Kipling is a poem about the Philippine-American War that exhorts the United States to assume colonial control of the Filipino people and their country.
The White Man's Burden. Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best you breed. Go send your sons to exile, to serve your captives needed, to wait in heavy harness, unflattered pork and wine. Your new caught sudden people, half devil, half child, take up the white man's burden, and patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror, and check the show of pride, by open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another profit and work another gain. Take up white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those you better, the hate of those you guard, the cry of hosts you humor, as lowly to the light. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another profit and work another gain. Take up white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those you better, the hate of those you guard.
Documentary sources of Philippine history by Zaid. In 1999, during the American occupation of the Philippines, United States President by William McKinley appointed a commission led by Dr. Jacobs Scarman to study and investigate the condition in the Philippines island. This was known as the First Philippine Commission by virtue of the USA Congress. Enactment of the Philippine Organic Act of 1902. The Philippines legislature was formed. The Philippine Commission exercised both executive and legislative powers with 3 Philippine delegates. Philippine Assembly 1907-1916. Electoral representation by Filipinos in the Philippines began when the American insular government allowed for partial self-government by establishing the Philippine Assembly. As the lower house, the Assembly shared legislative power with the Philippines Commission, which remained under American control because membership in the Philippine Commission was still limited to appointed American officials. So, the Philippines held its first national elections for the newly created representative body, which had an inaugural membership of 81 Filipinos represent the respective district in 1907, while still under American rule. In the years that followed, the number of districts was increased to 85 in 1910 and 91 and 1912. Resident commissioners to 1907-1946. From 1907 to 1946, the Philippines legislature sent a representative to sit in the USA House of Representatives. Under Spain, the Philippines had also been given limited representation in the Spanish courts, and like the resident commissioners, they had the right to speak but not to vote. Manuel Quezon, as assemblyman, was elected resident commissioner of the Philippines. He drafted a bill called the Jones Law, setting on paper the promise of virtual Philippines independence. The Senate of the Philippine Legislature 1916 to 1935. In 1916, position in the Philippines. Senate were open to Filipinos, with 12 senatorial districts and 2 senators elected from each. The inaugural president of the Senate in 1916 was Manuel L. Quezon, representing the 5th senatorial district. By 1921, a split between Senate President Manuel Quezon and House Speaker Sergio Osmeña was inevitable. The split also carried over to the Nacionalista Party between Quezon's collectivistas and Osmeña's unipersonalistas. Debates on bicameralism and unicameralism. So, the Tidings-McDuffie Act of 1934 required the election of a constitutional convention to draft the constitution of the incoming Commonwealth government. The convention was presided over by Claro Emerito, and 2002 elected Filipino delegates decided that the constitution to be written would cover not only the transitional Commonwealth, but would also apply to the Republic. The most heated debate in the convention was over whether the constitution should provide for unicameral or bicameral Congress. According to the 1935 Constitution, Senate President Manuel L. Quezon and Ronnie Smith, Senate President pro tempore Sergio Osmeña were elected as President and Vice President respectively, while voters elected representatives to the new unicameral National Assembly and local positions. Under the Commonwealth, 2 elections were held. The first in 1935 elected both the President of the Philippines and members of the National Assembly. The second in 1939. Only members of the National Assembly were elected. The National Assembly will be retired until 1941, when a constitutional amendment introduced a new structure for the legislature, restoring the 2 chambers of Congress. Restoration of the Senate in the Commonwealth, 1941. After 6 years under a unicameral legislature, the Constitution of 1935 was amended, restoring the Senate of the Philippines and the House of Representatives. The revived Senate was no longer elected via senatorial district, as it was from 1916 to 1935, but was nationally elected. There were 24 senators elected, out of whom 8 would hold their office for 6 years, another 8 for 4 years, and the last 8 for 2 years. Elections for members of these newly created chambers were held in 1941, but World War II prevented the elected members of Congress elected in November from assuming their posts. Return to unicameralism under Japanese occupation 1942-1945. During the Japanese occupation, the Commonwealth government fell to the United States, leaving the country under Japanese control via the Japanese Military Administration and the Japanese Executive Commission, with the Premier Hideki Tojo's proposed independence for the Philippines on June 16, 1943. The Japanese sponsored Second Republic was inaugurated on October 14, 1943, with Jose P. Laurel was elected president. This government debated the legislature to the unicameral National Assembly, abolishing the bicameral structure in accordance with the newly drafted 1943 Constitution. The Second Republic's National Assembly would exist until the arrival of the Allied forces in 1944, which liberated the Philippines from Imperial Japanese forces by 1945.
Bicameral Congress of the Commonwealth re-established 1945-1946. The first joint session of Congress convened on June 9, 1945, with most of the senators and representatives who were selected in 1941 assumed their position. Not all were allowed to take their posts because some were incarcerated for alleged collaboration with the Japanese. Manuel Rojas and Jose C. Julieta served as Senate President and Speaker of the House. Respectively, President Osmeña delivered his State of the Nation address on that day, a few days after Field Marshal Douglas MacArthur was declared honorary citizen of the Philippines. The Senate under the Third Republic 1946-1972. The Independent Republic of the Philippines was proclaimed on July 4, 1946 with Manuel Rojas as President. The Second Congress of the Commonwealth was transformed into the First Congress, also made up of the Senate and House of Representatives. This world marked the beginning of the count of Congress of the Republic until the imposition of martial law in 1972. In 1963, the Senate was dominated by the Liberal Party with 12 seats. Senator Ferdinand Marcos eventually won as Senate President, replacing Senate President Rodriguez of the Nacionalista Party. The following years, another impeachment case entered Congress for President Diosdado Macapagal for the betraying
Congress padlock under martial law, 1972-1986. On September 23, 1972, President Ferdinand E. Marcos issued Presidential Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire country under martial law. Day before the scheduled reopening of the Senate and House of Representatives under the 1933-35 Constitution, Marcos promulgated the 1973 Constitution. This effectively abolished Congress to replace it with an unicameral legislature, which would be formed 3 years after. It was not until the ouster of President Marcos through the EDSA People Power Revolution that talk of a bicameral Congress resumed.
The Senate of the Philippines 1987 to 2015. On March 25, 1986, President Aquino declared the revolutionary government by virtue of Presidential Proclamation Number 3, Section 1986, which suspended some provisions of the 1973 Constitution. This effectively abolished the Batasang Pangbansa of Legislature established by President Marcos. A Constitution Commission was tasked with draft a charter which is ratified on February 2, 1987. The 1987 Constitution re-established the people's representation through the bicameral legislature composed of the Senate of the House of Representatives. Sergio Osmeña, born on September 9, 1878 in Philippines, Cebu City, and died in Manila on October 19, 1961. He is a Filipino politician, a founder of Partido Nacionalista, served as president for the Philippines from 1944 to 1946. The Jones Law. The Jones Law was a natural act passed by the United States Congress. It was a system for a more independent government, with certain benefits saved to the joined together states to ensure its majestic rights and interface and arrangement of the for the allow of autonomy by the United States. Time frame of Jones Law. 416, also known as Jones Act, Philippine Autonomy Act, and Congress Act of August 29, 1916. In an organization bill passed by United States Congress. The separation of power. The Philippines is a republic with a presidential system of government, and its power is equally distributed to three departments: executive, legislative, and judicial. The legislature has the power to enact, modify, and repeal law through the power given to the Philippine Congress. The balance of separation of power. From executive branch to legislative branch, going to the judicial branch, going back to executive branch going back to judicial branch, and going back again to legislative branch, and getting back to the executive branch. The content of Jones Law. A bill that declares the purpose of American people for the future political status of the people of the Philippines Island, and provides a more autonomous government for these islands. The restriction of the law. One of the most important parts of the Jones Act is the replacement of committees with the election of the Senate and the extension of privileges to all educated Filipino men with minimal property qualifications. The law also includes a Bills of Rights. The composition of the government and their function. Executive branch. The executive branch is led by the president, who concurrently serves as the head of state and head of government. Legislative branch. The remainder of the House seat are designated for senatorial representatives elected at large through a complex party list system hinging on the party receiving at least 2% to 6% of the national vote total. Judicial branch. The judicial branch is the government is headed by the Supreme Court, which has a Chief Justice as its head and 14 associate justice, all appointed by the President on the recommendation of the Judicial and Bar Council. Other types of courts of verifying jurisdictional around the archipelago are lower collegiate courts, courts of appeal, courts of tax appeal, Sandigang Bayan, Muslim courts, Sharia District Court, Sharia Circuit Court, Regular Court, Regional Trial Court, Metropolitan Trial Court, Municipal Trial Court, Municipal Trial Court in cities, Municipal Circuit Courts in symbolism of American flag. Today's national flag consists of 13 horizontal stripes with 7 red and 6 white alternate. The stripe represents the 13 colonies. The stars represents the 15 states of the Union. The color of flag has a symbolic meaning. Red symbolizes tenacity and bravery. White symbolizes purity and innocence. And blue represents vigilance, persistence, and justice. Comprehensive background of Governor General Leonard Wood. Leonard Wood is a Major General, Doctor, and public official in the U.S. Army. He has served the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, the Governor of Cuban Military, and the Governor of Philippines. He began his career as a military doctor at the border, where he received the Medal of Honor. Arrived as a Governor General in the Philippines, Wood received the most votes of the first 4 votes of the convention, but the Republican Party nominated Warren G. Harding as president. Wood retired from the army in 1921 and was appointed governor of the Philippines later in the same year. He held this position until his death in 1927. Expectation for Governor General Leonard Wood. Wood Forbes Mission 1921 Fact-Finding Commission sent the Philippines by newly elected U.S. President Warren Harding in March 1921, which concluded that Filipinos were not yet ready for independence from the United States. Expectation versus reality. Expectation recognized that General Wood was involved in the liberation of Cuba. The Philippines expected to maintain a spirit of cooperation, political liberation in complete reality. There was a trend of usurpation and aber- arbitrary act resulted in curtail- curtailment of our autonomy and destruction of our constitutional system, reversal of American Philippines policy.
Presentation in analysis Filipino grievance against Governor Wood. He refused to agree to the most somehow. He turned a deaf ear to the legal power and responsibilities of the hand of various departments in the Philippines. He replaced 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 his constitutional advisor with a group of military attached who had no legal status in the government and were not accountable to the people. He reserve, rebe, he reversed the government police of serving police Filipino citizen by appointing American event for Filipino who the ability to prove their ability. He obstructed the implementation of the National Economic Police Responsibility Post passed by the legislature only because the police conflicted with his personal view. He has rendered remitted perpetract the power of the legislator to pass the annual appropriation law by reviving item in the law of the preceding year after voting the corresponding item of the current Operation Act in the flagrant violation for organic law. After voting the appropriation of this seller, he has appointed position and authorized the payment of seller. He used certain public fund to provide additional compensation to public official who had clearly violated the law. After the abolition of the emergency committee, he ably granted that law to the emergency committee on the ground that, that its power invalid the illegal granting of legislative power. He has unduly interfered in the administration of justice. He refused to seek the opinion of the Senate on the appointment required by the organic law. He refused to submit to the Senate for appointment because he violated the Organic Act and had a vacancy during the adjournment of the legislature. He continued to serve as the nominee justice by the Senate. He usurped legislative power by imposing conditions on the legislative measure he approved. He created a situation in the management of affairs in Mindanao that led to discord between Christian and Muslim Filipinos. His policies created tensions between American residents and Filipinos. He used bankrupt as an excuse to sell all confused companies worth millions of people, government capital to powerful American interests. He approved insidious propaganda campaigns in the United States target the Filipino people and their wishing. He created a situation in the management of affairs in Mindanao that led to discord between Christian and Muslim Filipinos. His policies created tensions between American residents and Filipinos. He used bankrupt as an excuse to, to seal all confused companies, world millions of people, government, compete, capital to powerful American interests. He approved insidious, insidious propaganda campaigns in the United States target the Filipino people and their wishing. He tried, he tried to close the National Bank of the Philippines, which is so necessary for the country economic development. He violated autonomy by intervening and directly controlling 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 the land and local affairs of the Philippines government. He insisted on amending our law approved by the U.S. Congress, which would open up our country resources for exploitation by predatory interests. The protest of Filipinos against the general, particularly against the Executive Order No. 37, in the face of the critical situation with the constitutional representative of the Filipino people meet to deliberate on the current difficult in the government of the Philippines lands and to determine how best to preserve preserve the primary and majesty of the law as well as to safeguard our people's rights and liberties, having faith in the sense of justice of the people of the United States and inspired by her patriotic explain in the early day of her history. Presentation and analysis. We recall a rejoinder he made to Quezon famous statement. My loyalty to my party and where my loyalty to my country began a rejoinder that deserved an equal place of hero in our country's annals.